Most people do not fail because they lack discipline. They fail because they betray themselves in ways so small, so quiet, that they no longer recognize them as betrayal. It does not happen in dramatic moments. It happens in the space between intention and action. A promise is made and then adjusted. A decision is formed and then softened. A path is chosen and then quietly abandoned when resistance appears. Over time, something begins to erode. Not skill, not intelligence, but trust. And once trust in oneself is weakened, no system, no strategy, no external structure can hold. Long before the modern world turned self-improvement into endless advice, the warriors of Japan understood something far more severe. The greatest enemy was not outside. It was the moment a man turned away from his own word. In the teachings of Miyamoto Musashi, discipline was not built through motivation, but through alignment. A warrior did not negotiate with himself. He did not create distance between what he said and what he did. The moment that distance appeared, weakness followed. And so, the path was simple but unforgiving. Do not divide. Do not retreat internally. Do not betray the decision once it is made. Chapter 1. The First Fracture. In the modern world lived a man named Riku. He was not careless. He thought deeply about his life, his goals, and the direction he wanted to take. He made plans with clarity, spoke with confidence, and believed himself to be committed. From the outside, nothing seemed broken. But beneath that structure, something subtle was forming. A pattern so quiet, it escaped his attention. Each time Riku made a decision, there was a small delay before action. In that delay, a thought would appear, a reason to adjust, to wait, to reconsider. It did not feel like weakness. It felt reasonable, even intelligent. Why act immediately when you could refine the decision? Why commit fully when conditions were not perfect? And so, he allowed these small shifts to guide him. At first, nothing seemed wrong. But over time, the gap between his intentions and his actions began to widen. He noticed that his plans rarely reached completion. His effort felt inconsistent. His focus would dissolve at the first sign of resistance. It was not that he did not care, it was that something within him had learned that his own word was flexible. And once that belief took hold, his actions lost their weight. Chapter 2. The Samurai's Measure. The samurai did not measure a man by his ambition. They measured him by his consistency. In the code of Bushido, a decision was not an expression of desire. It was a commitment that carried weight. Once spoken, it was expected to be followed, without internal resistance. This was not about perfection, it was about unity. The samurai understood that the moment a man allows himself to move away from his own word, he creates division. Part of him moves forward, but another part remains behind, questioning, resisting, weakening the action. This division is where self-betrayal begins, not in failure, but in hesitation. Riku had never considered this. He believed that discipline was something you applied when necessary. But the samurai saw it differently. Discipline was not something you turned on, it was something you embodied. It was the removal of the gap between decision and execution. No delay, no negotiation, no adjustment based on feeling. Chapter 3. The Pattern Revealed. As time passed, Riku began to notice a pattern he could no longer ignore. Each time he avoided a task, It followed the same sequence. A decision would be made, then discomfort would appear, and immediately after, a justification would emerge. He would tell himself he would do it later, or that it was not the right moment, or that he needed more preparation. These justifications were not loud. They were quiet, almost convincing. But they always led to the same outcome: delay. And with each delay, something inside him weakened. Not his ability, but his trust in himself. He began to feel uncertain, not because he lacked direction, but because he no longer believed he would follow through. This is how self-betrayal operates. It does not destroy you in a single moment, it accumulates. Each time you move away from your own word, you reinforce a pattern. And eventually, that pattern becomes identity. A person who does not follow through does not suddenly become disciplined. He becomes someone who expects himself to fail. Chapter 4: The Discipline of Alignment. The samurai approached this problem with precision. They did not attempt to fix everything at once. They focused on alignment. When a decision was made, it was followed immediately by action. No delay, no internal discussion. The mind was not allowed to create distance. This principle was reinforced through practices influenced by Zen Buddhism. In stillness, the mind reveals its tendencies. The urge to move, to adjust, to escape becomes visible. And instead of following it, the practitioner remains. Over time, this builds a different kind of strength. Not force, but stability. Riku began to experiment with this idea. He chose a simple action each day and committed to executing it without hesitation. No matter how small, it had to be completed exactly as decided. At first, this felt unnatural. His mind resisted. It offered reasons to delay, to improve, to reconsider. But he did not engage, he acted. Something began to change. The gap between his thoughts and his actions started to close. The decisions became heavier, more real, and with that weight came a sense of clarity he had not felt before. Chapter 5: The Cost of Division. Before this shift, Riku's mind was constantly divided. Part of him was always evaluating alternatives, questioning decisions, searching for easier paths. This created a constant tension. Even in rest, his mind was active. Even in action, it was uncertain. The samurai understood that this division was not harmless. It was a form of weakness. A divided mind cannot produce clean action. It hesitates, it fragments, it loses efficiency, and over time, it exhausts itself. As Riku reduced this division, he noticed something unexpected. His actions became simpler, not easier, but clearer. He no longer needed to convince himself to act. The decision had already been made. There was nothing left to negotiate. This is the cost of self-betrayal. It creates unnecessary complexity. It forces you to think about what should already be decided, and in doing so, it drains the energy required for action. Chapter 6: The End of Excuses. Excuses are not always obvious. They often appear as logic, as caution, as careful planning. But beneath them, there is usually a single function: to delay action without confronting the reason for delay. Riku began to see his excuses for what they were: not protection, but avoidance. Each one created distance between him and his own commitment. And each time he accepted one, he reinforced the pattern of betrayal. The samurai did not allow this. not because they were harsh, but because they understood the consequence. A warrior who negotiates with himself in moments of action cannot be relied upon, not by others and not by himself. So Riku removed the need for excuses. He replaced negotiation with execution. If a decision was made, it was followed. If resistance appeared, it was ignored. Not suppressed, but not obeyed. This was not comfortable, but it was effective. Chapter 7: Identity Without Betrayal. Over time, something deeper began to form. Riku's identity started to shift. He no longer saw himself as someone who tries. He began to see himself as someone who does. This was not based on belief, but on repeated action. Each time he followed through, he reinforced this identity. Each time he refused to betray his own word, he strengthened it. The process was slow, but it was stable. Unlike motivation, it did not depend on mood or circumstance. The samurai understood this principle clearly. They did not rely on how they felt, they relied on who they were. A warrior does not ask whether he should act. He acts because that is his nature. Riku adopted this fully. He removed the option to betray himself, not because it was easy, but because it was necessary. The decision was made once and then repeated through action. Chapter 8: The Return of Trust. As this pattern continued, something returned that Riku had not realized he had lost: trust. Not in the world, not in others, but in himself. He began to believe that when he decided something, it would be done. This changed everything. His thoughts became quieter. His actions became more direct. He no longer needed to overthink or overanalyze. The decision carried its own weight. The samurai valued this above all else. Not skill, not speed, but reliability. A man who can trust himself does not hesitate. He does not fragment. He moves with clarity because there is no internal resistance. Conclusion: The End of Self Betrayal. The end of self-betrayal is not a dramatic transformation. It is a quiet shift, a closing of the gap between what you say and what you do, a refusal to create distance between intention and action. It does not require perfection, it requires consistency. Each time you follow through, you strengthen alignment. Each time you resist the urge to delay, you reinforce trust. And over time, this becomes something stable. The samurai did not seek motivation, they sought unity, a state where the mind and body move together without division, where decisions are not questioned but carried. When you remove self-betrayal, something remains. Not intensity, not force, but clarity. A quiet strength that does not depend on conditions. A presence that does not fragment. And in that presence, you no longer struggle to act, you simply act as one.